everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Michael Goff, Principal Product Marketing at Revenera, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Growing Cloud-Native Application Revenue with Enhanced Entitlement Management. Today we're going to be discussing the increasing use of software containerization and the gap between continuous delivery and entitlement management. With more software producers moving to containerized deployments for their end customers to deploy in the cloud or locally, there's a real need to cover the entire process, from provisioning to customer delivery, in a seamless way that ensures that software is only delivered to paying customers and that revenue gets recognized in seconds. Really excited to have two great speakers with us today. Paul Nashawaty is a senior analyst at ESG and covers infrastructure modernization and application modernization. Paul has extensive knowledge in digital transformation initiatives across front-end and back-end systems, as well as the supporting infrastructure ecosystem that supports these efforts. Paul brings more than 25 years of experience in delivering go-to-market strategies, including identifying new routes to market, expanding and developing partner ecosystems, and achieving positive business results through execution of strategic plans. We also have my colleague, Scott Niemann, with us today. Scott is Director, Product Management for Software Monetization Products here at Revenera. Scott's held key roles in Revenera's product management team for more than 8 years, and prior to Revenera, Scott held product management roles at IBM, iLogix, and Telelogic. So before we get started with today's discussion, I'd like to take a moment to go over some housekeeping details. The boxes that you see on your screen are movable and resizable. You can maximize slide area and things like that. Feel free to tweak it to your liking. Today's discussion will last about 40 to 45 minutes or so. We are going to have some time for Q&A, so please add your questions, and we may answer them as we go or at the end if we have time. Some networks do cause slides to advance a little bit more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. And if your slides are behind, just push F5 on your keyboard, and that will refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical questions located in the Help Engagement tool at the bottom of your screen. That's the one that looks like a question mark sign. And finally, a copy of the recording will be available in the next 48 hours or so. So let's get started. So Paul, cloud native microservices continue to get a lot of attention, and I know that you've done a lot of research at ESG on the growth of containers. What are you finding?
Well, first off, Michael, Scott, thank you very much for having me on this webinar today. Excuse me. I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about what we have to offer here and what we have to share in this presentation. We are really seeing an explosive growth in this area. One of the things that, really kind of, we have to think about is there's tremendous push in digital transformation, right? This digital transformation drove a lot of new digital initiatives, right? And those new digital initiatives really led to the optimization and trying to move information to really figure out how applications are best going to be deployed, right? So whether they're deployed on premises or in the cloud or some kind of hybrid approach, there's just different initiatives that have to be like recognized, right? So when we look at this, the optimization and utilization of these resources really comes down to what's the best platform to use. And when we look at, the cloud has a way to give that ability to have, burst capacity, growth capacity, but also have the ability to really start to expand and drive different types of portability around applications. So cloud native and application microservices are really starting to take off in the space, right? So, but the challenge with it is when you look at cloud native and microservices applications, it is incredibly important to understand entitlement management for the cloud, right? Not just for on-premises, but also for the cloud, right? Why is that? So when you think about it, and when we look at this, the area of focus is without entitlement management, organizations may not realize what they could be missing or what they could be maybe revenue opportunities or feature functionality or product growth. All these things really come into consideration when we're talking about the growth of applications in the cloud. So but before we kind of get into the research, I do want to qualify the research with, some information about ESG. And just to kind of put it into perspective, when we look at our research overall, ESG has done 44 unique primary research studies that have fielded, right? And when we look at those research studies, over 20,000 surveys have been in-depth interviews are conducted over 29 different countries. So when we're looking at the data that we're talking about and related to cloud native and microservices, this is a representation of a broad scope of respondents across various sectors and in various parts of the industry. So we're not just looking at a monolithic kind of focus, we're looking at it holistically across the industry. So that's incredibly important to point out because, we can certainly conduct a survey that's very focused, but that's not going to represent really what the trends are happening in the industry. So we're trying to understand what those overall trends are happening in the industry. So, I mentioned the containers and microservices growth and such. And, what we see here is on this slide, the growth of containers over the last 2 years has just been explosive. And that's really the word that I would use is explosive, because when we ask respondents this question of how long their organizations or how long organizations have been using production applications in containerized technologies, 41% basically has stated that they've been doing this containerized production applications for about 12 to 23 months. That's impressive because it's not back early on in containers and orchestration and such. It was mainly about test and dev. Can we test and dev, try stuff out, then deploy into production? Production may or may not have been in containers. But now what we're seeing is the growth of containers for production applications is taking off. And, out of that response, the 35% of respondents indicated that they really use an agile software development extensively. So they were looking for understanding the feedback of their customer journey, understanding what's happening with their customers, using their technologies, interacting with their applications, and then being agile about software development to incorporate those changes. So lots happening there with regards to containers, especially in production environment. With application modernization, it's driving more of these production applications to the cloud, right? And we're seeing this in our research, right? We're seeing that the cloud adoption's taken off and moving on. And then finally, Michael, I'd like to point out here that, the last bullet on this slide just indicates that containers used in production applications, the respondents saying that 77% of the respondents indicate that they currently use containers in production environments. Just a significant growth. And we'll talk more about that research a little bit later in the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Now, Scott, I know that when we talk about cloud native, a lot of people conflate cloud native initiatives with SaaS. But that's not always true, and I know that there are a lot more use cases to consider. Can you walk us through some of these use cases and sort of describe what those look like?
Yeah, sure, Michael. I would look at it like this, right? So traditionally, you basically deliver updates, deliver patches, security updates, through files, through installations. And that's been something that's been working, in the industry for some time, right? Either that software is obtained by going to a website and pulling it down, or the application has some intelligence into it where it calls home, identifies who it is and what version it's running on, and pulls down software. Now, really, what we're really talking about here in terms of cloud native is supporting very similar, if not the same, use cases. And that's because suppliers as they're changing their own internal processes and building more microservices and deploying containers and charts within their own organization, they want to take advantage of that to have the full end-to-end deployment to their customers, right? So it's a way for them to easily push out updates, not have to wait for the monolith releases and installation processes. They can give the benefit directly to their customer. And in doing that, we're talking about use cases really where it's traditional software that they want to deploy directly to a customer that the customer may be managing themselves in their enterprise on a private cloud. It may be areas where they want to deliver updates to software that's in an air-gapped environment, right? So there's no direct connection for applications to connect to a registry to pull down containers, for example, but they may have something on site, a registry of sorts, which replicates, information so that those containers can be easily deployed within, clients and endpoints within the enterprise. And so then you get into the whole area of devices, right? So it's not just, traditional desktop applications, productivity applications. It's actually software running on devices are also other use cases that we're seeing. So in that case, it's a little bit different challenges, right? Because you have a device, you don't necessarily have somebody executing Docker command lines in a GUI, pulling down images and looking at what they want. But you have a device that can interact with the system in a similar way, and that system also needs to know whether that device is entitled to receive those images. What image should it be listed and viewed in the first place, and then being able to authenticate to make sure that device is part of that organization, and then pull down those images. And then the other one is really that we've seen in Revenera, especially on the traditional software, is that a lot of our customers rely on the supply chain to basically service their customers. So that's not only delivering services, it's delivering software, fully deployed software for their customers. So in that case, they're setting up as through their CI/CD is populating images to their channel partners, and those channel partners are taking that software, loading it on devices, maybe going on site and actually doing the installation within the private enterprise themselves. So bottom line, it's many of the same types of use cases that we're seeing today with traditional files. Since more suppliers are taking advantage of containerized applications, they want those same benefits there also.
Thanks, Scott. And I know that when a lot of folks start moving to cloud native applications, it's complex and there are challenges that can arise if you don't plan ahead and don't anticipate some of the questions and some of the issues. Paul, can you maybe dig into some of those questions that get forgotten, and then Scott, maybe offer up some examples of some of the things that you've seen in conversations or experience with customers and prospects?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. I mean, there's a lot of things that customers look at, or people looking at deploying to the cloud, applications to the cloud. They're really looking at basically it comes down to what's not known, right? They look at it in the context of, okay, well, we know we want to move to the cloud, but we're going to just go. And they refactor their application, and they don't really necessarily know what the impact is by refactoring their application. So by doing this, our research has shown that a number of people that refactor and move to the cloud often have these unforeseen costs that come with moving applications to the cloud, right? And by doing so, some of that really, some clients or some customers will actually repatriate back on premises because they just don't understand the impact of the cloud. They don't understand the impact of the cost. And they also don't recognize the full reward that the application can be driven by revenue from that application moving to the cloud. And because some things are just not left on the table. So Scott, I really like what you were talking about with regards to the SaaS-based deployment and such. But a lot of questions that kind of are left out there are, what about the things that you just don't know, right? What about the things that you may think you have the full kind of picture of deploying in the cloud, but a lot of research has shown that we can see that deploying in the cloud always has these kind of stones that are unturned that you run into that you may not actually know of at the point of delivery.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So what I see, and along those lines, is what often suppliers aren't thinking about is how I'm going to potentially license that application, right? Because you're moving now to a new paradigm where traditional licensing is based on having some concrete, unique identifier, right, where you're going to bind a license to. And typically what happens then is that within wherever the client application is running, if it's on a device or a laptop, there's some type of license rights stored on that client. And really in this new paradigm, that a lot of that falls apart. For one, one of the benefits of moving to containerized applications is you can spin them up, spin them down quite easily. You don't have the stability that you have, with a traditional on-premise application to bind, use rights and monetized features as easily. So, sometimes what I've seen is that they think about this, once they get on board and they're ready to start delivering the containerized applications, then it comes, later in the process to like, okay, how are we going to protect and monetize this software? What are we going to bind it to? Because there's no, there's no MAC address or anything like that we can bind it to. So the good news is there are ways to approach that, a lot of different ways, but that is something I think you definitely have to plan up front, which is pretty much obvious with on-premise applications, but takes a little bit more, thought in how you're going to deliver that for the containerized applications in the cloud.
That's a great point, Scott. And, obviously, we have it up here as one of the questions that can get forgotten. We always talk about entitlement management, in terms of licensing and monetization, making sure that, people aren't getting software they're not entitled to, but also there are export control issues that exist too. And certain folks shouldn't be getting software as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other thing that comes into play later, right? So in a traditional file-based system, most of our suppliers I know have some way to at least either define, if they have to define ECCN classifications for U.S. export controls, they have ways to do that. But they also have to ensure that, potential software isn't getting into the hands of parties it shouldn't be getting into because they may be on denied party lists of some country. So, of course, none of that goes away. They still all have to do that in this new paradigm.
Right.
So
it is the same issues. It's now just applying it to this new world we're in. So actually, speaking of the new world, let's put a poll question up there. Let's see. Make sure I'm doing this right. Hopefully everybody can now see the poll question. I want to get a sense from the audience. Does your organization currently use containers or plan to use containers for production applications in the next 12 months? And we'll give you a little bit of time to respond to that. But Paul, I know that you've actually asked this question specifically. What were you guys at ESG finding?
No, I absolutely have. I did want to address one other point on that previous slide that it's great to kind of bring up because it segues in. And as you know, we're doing this research paper that people will have access to as out of this webinar. But the other thing to consider on that previous slide is the build versus buy model, right? And that build versus buy, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but basically the build versus buy is also something to take into consideration with regards to entitlement, because all those things that you mentioned, like I'll just take export rules as an example. If you don't know, that can really prevent your business it can really hurt your business moving forward. But specifically on this polling question, I mean, this is a fun actually exercise because the results of this exercise were a bit staggering to me. When I was getting the research back on the microservice-based cloud-native applications, we asked organizations, and we polled about 383 or so respondents, what organization is currently using, what in their organization, do they currently use containers or plan to use containers in production over the next 12 months? Now, it's a little bit different than the previous research that I shared, but on this slide, I referenced the 77%. They currently use containers for production applications. But in addition to that, the 21% indicate that they plan on using containers for production applications in the next 12 months. So we look at this and we say, we have 98% of respondents basically saying they're going to be using containers for production applications. And 2% basically saying they're not interested in containers. So if there's not a direction on your roadmap to be using containers and production applications, this research alone indicates that that's the direction that you really need to be thinking about, right, as part of your deployment models, right? And and then when we look at the other architectural implementation design parts, the thing that's important to kind of tease out of those data points is the focus that software developers are looking to inject functionality, resources, libraries, processes into the container as part of their deployment cycle. So when we look at entitlement management here, and we look at how things are injected in the container for software, how do you know that your customer that's purchasing your software is getting everything that they purchased, or better yet, maybe they're not getting everything they purchased, or it's an upsell opportunity to sell them more, right? So these points are really important to kind of take into consideration when you look at delivering software, delivering, containerized in those production environments. It's not about test and dev anymore. It's about running real world production environments with real world consequences if those applications go down. So it's important to do it right the first time.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I don't know if you saw the results of our poll flash up on the screen. Not surprisingly, given the topic of this conversation today, 100% of people currently use containers or are planning to use containers in the next.
Very good. Very good. So it aligns nicely to this. Yes.
Yep. But I thought it would be useful, Scott, for us to sort of talk about some of the the real world examples that we're seeing. I know that we talked about some of the use cases, but maybe if you can dig in a little bit more to how we're seeing containers being used in an entitlement driven way.
Scott, yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Let's take the first example in the healthcare industry. So, interestingly enough, I mean, obviously, healthcare has been, pretty active over the last a year and a half, especially. And we see a lot of digital transformations going on in terms of really software delivery. I would say 2 to 3 years ago, maybe a little more than that. I mean, a lot of what was going on here was coming from, physical media. Oftentimes what would happen is that these medical device manufacturers would send installers on site to the hospitals with CDs, and they would do the installation and upgrades there. Very, very, back in the day type of thing, right? And so they've started a transformation some time ago where they're starting to getting into more electronic software delivery. And now they're taking another jump in really they're reimagining on how they're, re-architecting their internal processes. But they want to move to an approach where they can, give the end customer the benefit of, of quicker updates, more regular updates with new features and new functions overall to increase, user satisfaction, and being able to also update very quickly without having to send those installers on site. So that's a huge benefit for them if they could do this in an automated way. And so what we're seeing here with them is that they want to take advantage of entitlement management, because in a lot of these situations, I just take an example in a hospital, they may buy 5 MRI machines, but those 5 MRI machines may not do the same thing, right? They may have different features and functions enabled on each one of them. And so, integrated with device and entitlement management, when those machines need updates, they know specifically what type of update and what features should be delivered to those machines. And now what we're seeing here as they're moving forward is they have a way in which they can To some degree, they're still sending out installers because some of these installations are very complex, right? Especially on some of the safety critical machines they have on site. But a lot of this they can do in an automated way. And so these machines, of course, in most cases, they're not connecting to the internet. Some are, but in some cases, you don't want some of these machines connecting to the internet, and potential, that just opens up a lot of security issues. And so they've come up with a way in which they want to deliver, specifically this specific customer is sending Helm charts in the form of package distributions that get installed automatically. They are essentially have local container registries at these hospitals, which will replicate with a registry that has all the entitled rights of that hospital. So when it replicates the data to the hospital, it automatically has the Helm charts and containers in which that hospital has been entitled to. And it also knows the different devices that are within the hospital and the specific packages of software that it needs. And so they've significantly reduced their overall overhead, their speed to delivery, because it's been much significant having an automated way to do this. And now taking advantage of, the microservice architecture and deployment of Helm charts directly, it's a huge transformation for these customers. And we see it happening more and more within the healthcare space as well.
And Scott, is it fair to say in that example, you also wouldn't want to have every piece of software that you made available, right? You want just those ones that they're entitled to, because that's going to cut down on confusion, on what gets installed where, and updates like that.
Exactly. Right. So what they have in this case is that local registry is able to sync with the entitlement system, so it knows what that, in this specific case, what the hospital is entitled to, because their use rights, what they bought, all the different devices, as well as the products that fit on those devices, are maintained within the entitlement system. And then when the synchronization happens, it only synchronizes what it should see, right? So it's not seeing a bunch of unnecessary information, which is a problem, which is actually not only the healthcare industry, but in most areas of electronic software delivery. If you don't have that entitlement hook, you're basically giving them a laundry list of software they can download, but especially if it's software that's running on a device, you don't want to download the wrong piece of software. You want to be able to download the correct software with the correct configuration on it based on what that device may be entitled to. And if you don't have that automated within an entitlement system, then it becomes very fragile and difficult to try to maintain that.
Great. And Paul, I saw you jump in. Were you about to say something, or was it just a weird on 24 issue?
No, I was actually. I really think that what Scott's spot on. The one piece I wanted to add to that was, there is a change in delivery from on-prem to SaaS-based, right? And often this change in delivery, potentially could create a friction that it will create challenges within your organization, right? And in order to make it frictionless, you really need to have a way to manage the entitlement that goes for that application, right? So I was just kind of echoing a lot of what Scott was saying, and I think that those pieces, we know that cloud native adoption is just taking off. We know that change is happening. We know that there's a move in the space, and what we're trying to echo on this webinar, what we're trying to show in the research is that take into consideration the fact that reducing the friction and providing what you need, what the client needs, is going to enhance the client's journey, right? If that client's journey is happy, then you're going to be obviously happy because it's going to reflect in revenue, right? They're going to buy more. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to, understand what that client's getting, and they're getting what they need, right? And it makes everybody, the whole process flow better, right? But again, the frictionless piece is key, because you can cobble this together and kind of put it together. And yeah, at the end of the day, maybe the client's happy, maybe the customer's happy, but the bumps along the way are what you want to resolve so the journey is smooth. right? That's really what I was kind of thinking about when Scott was talking.
Yeah, no, great point. And obviously, in healthcare environments, manufacturing environments, you want to make sure that, if there are updates related to safety or security, things like that, absolutely makes sense to make that as frictionless as possible. Scott, now I know you have another example that you want to talk about more on the enterprise software side.
Yeah, sure. This is an interesting example, enterprise software provider of many types of applications that you would see within a typical enterprise. Large portfolio, and they were a company that had bought definitely into the value of entitlement management years and years ago. Their issue is that they're transforming from traditional file installation process to essentially delivering Helm charts and containers. They want to improve that experience, tenfold. And it also is a buy versus build scenario here, because what they struggled with is when they started to move to this new paradigm of container delivery, there was no tie to entitlement, right, in which they saw. And so they had a separate system that they were working on. I mean, there's a lot of obviously CI/CD tool chains out there that do, integration and deployment very well. The issue is there's no hooks into those into entitlement systems, right? So the first approach they did was to try to take these images and wrapping them up in tarballs, right? And then shipping them through a traditional entitlement-based software delivery system, which kind of eliminates all the value that their end customers got, right? Because they have to download those tarballs, unzip them, and then actually do an install, rather than to automatically sending updates, to that customer in a very, user-friendly way in cloud-native application approaches. So that created a very bad end customer experience. But then it was about, okay, how can we integrate those external systems with an entitlement system? So there's a lot of things they tried to do, but quickly, very hard to manage that if you're trying to do that through integration, trying to build your own middleware and integrations between two different systems. And so we got to talking to this customer quite a bit. He's been with us for many years. And, that's kind of when we worked with them to talk about some scenarios and ultimately, bridge that gap between container delivery and entitlement management to make it automated and to improve that customer experience. So now they're able to, one big thing that they were very, actually it's not on here, but I'll bring it up, was very important to them was the export controls, right? They took advantage of that with entitlement delivery, and they wanted that same type of value. The trial process was very interesting. So they want to basically give a container library to a customer, and they can go down and start downloading images and try them out, and then commit to buying something later, right? So this whole system in the trial process and the trial conversion, tying that to entitlement and getting all that data for reporting was very simple, since they had the container delivery integrated with entitlement management. And so bottom line, they were actually able to leverage their whole existing end-to-end fulfillment process. And what I mean by that is all the way from an order, which is coming into their ERP or CRM system, into the entitlement system, to the fulfillment system, the things that they already had architected years ago for traditional files. Basically, they were able to leverage all those existing integrations for a container-based delivery approach.
Thanks, Scott. And certainly, you mentioned tarballs. That does not sound frictionless. That sounds very
tarballs. These containers are so big, tarballs, and then they were delivering these huge files that would take forever to download, right? So it was not pretty.
Yeah,
but Scott, sorry, Scott, I think that one other thing that, I love this example because, with enterprise software, one of the pieces that enterprises are big, right? There's typically a lot of people in enterprises. And then when software gets deployed, it's very often very difficult to understand licenses across different groups in enterprises as well. So, and when you have the ability to do electronic fulfillment of licenses to other groups, now you have the ability to expand your sale or your footprint, because you can put that software in and bring that licenses. But also, more importantly, you can do denial of validation and denial of services to groups that are not entitled, right? Then they don't have those licenses or that validation. So I think it's important to kind of keep these pieces in mind as we unpack a lot of these different ways to think about these examples. But it's also important for the audience here to think about when they go to deploy their software, or when they go to deploy, it's not just about getting it out there and pushing the features out there, but it's about getting the right pieces out to the right people, and based on what's available to them.
Right. Yeah, great point, Paul. And actually, we did just get a question in that sort of ties into what you were talking about before, Scott. Person asks, we're building our own container ecosystem. What are some of the pros and cons of building our own entitlement management functionality as part of that process? And I'd throw that out to both of you. I think you're probably both eminently qualified to answer that.
Yeah, so I'll start off. So you want to make sure you're building out your system. So the entitlement management system just needs to know what in terms of what's coming in terms of orders, what they own, and what software goes with those particular products, what upgrades goes with those products. You have to have a way to map all that out, and so that when the difficult challenge is if an end customer is pulling images, right? Say you have a private registry or whatever you're doing, right, to push your images up, and you want to present those images to your customer. Typically they're going to log into that registry, they're going to authenticate themselves and start downloading those images. And so unless there's a way to intercept those commands, right, you may be providing them a tool to do that. But if they were using a standard command line tool, you'd have to find a way to intercept that command line interface, determine who is making that call, what account they belong to, and what products and services they own, so that once that Docker pull, for example, or Helm install commune is executed from an end customer perspective, that entitlement system you have knows whether it should, how it should act. Should I send back the information they've requested? Do they have a valid entitlement? Is the subscription date still valid? Is there, however it is, in terms of what they bought? Or should I just respond back that you're not entitled for the software, right? So there's just a lot of things you have to do with that system to integrate it with an order system, so that, when those commands are coming into your local registry or your private registry, it knows how to process that information to determine whether those customers should be allowed to pull those images or not.
Yeah, and Scott, I would echo a lot of what you said. But with the whole build versus buy conversation, it's a challenge, right? Because one way to kind of institute this is to kind of look at a build versus buy approach. But this also requires you to have a good understanding of what's happening in the industry, leading knowledge, of what's happening around that, the knowledge, and also how to de-risk your project, have the guidance and architecture review that supports it. But the other thing around build versus buy to take into consideration, and Scott, you touched on the kind of intricacies of how the architecture is laid out, and that makes a lot of sense. But I also think having the insights for organizations to know what they need in order to build the application right the first time. But keep in mind that if you build it, then you also will own the support operations, 24/7 support, dedicated SLAs, everything that kind of goes along with it, as well as incidents that you may run into. And without having, that knowledge or that maybe that expertise in house, you may be kind of focused on running the system that you're building versus running your business. right? And that's something to consider. Even if you have the expertise in-house, do you want to own that process, or do you want to outsource that process? And that's a cost analysis that businesses have to take on themselves to understand whether it fits their models. But just take all that into consideration when you're thinking about the build versus buy approach.
Thanks, Paul. So we are sort of closing in on the end of our session. Let me just check to see if we have any more questions coming in. But while I'm waiting for that, Paul, do you have any final thoughts or takeaways? I know that we're finalizing the white paper on this topic that we're going to be sharing with the audience as soon as that's ready. Anything you'd like to close with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main takeaways here is, cloud native adoption and the growth of containers as well as Kubernetes. It's here, right? And this is what we need to be working towards. It's the new normal. And having cloud native software and containerized applications, it allows the acceleration of growth between, the on-prem to the cloud, but also application deployment. Remember that your clients that are using those applications, their end users, their deployment, it really doesn't matter that it's transparent to them. So it needs to work the way the end users are looking at it. So I think that, when you're looking at the change of delivery from on-prem to SaaS, or the changes in your CI/CD pipeline, all these things are impacting modernized challenges, right? And these challenges really need to be considered in a different way than maybe a traditional approach would deliver, right? So I think that, the entitlement management really addresses a lot of those pieces, whether it's process or the functionality or the management or just an overall wellness of the client. The entitlement management piece really plays an integral part of that solution.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And, as a product manager of an entitlement system, as well as a software delivery system, I have seen in the last couple of years this just skyrocket. And the question I'm getting is how to tie these two together, because the big concern is they're moving to, delivering containers directly. They want to know, to ensure that they're not, running into situations of overuse or sending containers to customers that aren't entitled to them. They also want the information back, right? So they want to be able to know, of the customers that are entitled, they want to have the audit trail. They want to know who's pulling the images, who's pulling that information, get that back into the entitlement system, reconcile that data and report it, so they can, get a 360-degree view of not only how they're deploying, but also how it's being consumed by their users. So it's, in terms of software delivery, how I term it as a product manager for entitlement management, it's actually really exciting times in this area for us. It's really branching out into, a new innovative way. And entitlement management is really, making it even better. So that's my final word.
Well, thank you, Scott. And my thanks to both of you, Paul Nashawaty from ESG, Scott Niemann, product manager here at Revenera. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. Really good conversation today, really good insights, really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We will be sending a link to the recording within the next couple of days, as we mentioned earlier. And then as soon as that white paper is ready, you will be receiving that automatically. And thank you again. Gentlemen, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.